All right, peace. Get set up here. Got here fairly on time, running a minute or two late. Just want to get situated, wait for a few more people to come in the room. Running just a minute or two late there. All right, so while we're waiting for people to come in, people starting to come in. Peace. Peace, Gypsy Goddess. Peace, Brother Dan. Okay. Peace, DR. All right, so we're just going to give it a minute as people slowly coming in. In about a minute or so, I'm going to just go a couple quick announcements, as I usually do before we briefly before we begin. And then we'll get into the topic for this evening. All right. All right. So as people filing in, let's go ahead and a couple quick announcements as usual. For those that have emailed me, I was running a little late today. I was just finished a consultation. Actually had a few of them today. I'm 2 days out. So if you do email, I try to stay on that 2-day minimum time frame. So just as long as, I can fit you in that frame. So if you do email me for a consultation, it's a little bit busy right now. Just give me at least 48 hours, 2 days. Sometimes I can do it in 24, but right now I at least need 2-day notice. And specify when you do email me if you are requesting a spiritual consultation or reading. There is a difference between the two. As I've explained in the past, spiritual reading is where we consult the spirits and the ancestors using a tool of divination. And a spiritual consultation is more of a free-for-all. You can utilize it for whatever you want. Advice, information, any specific topic or area you want to focus on. People use it for a multitude of things, guidance on this path. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or later down the road, you can use that as a personal one-on-one session. So specify that when you do email me. Also, upcoming event, which we have pretty much got finalized and organized, the event on the 26th, which will be at the end of this month, 26 and 27. Peace K. Edwards, peace double R. We got the whole itinerary finalized over the weekend. As I said before, for the event on the 26th and the 27th, we have several different presenters on a multitude of different topics. Brother Mike's going to be doing something on the 7 Hermetic principles and how that applies in everyday life. It's going to be kind of a group participation thing from what he told me. So some of these discourses and presentations are kind of going to be interreactive for those that are going to be there on Friday for that. So a couple different things planned. So it's something kind of we're going to do annually once a year. So again, the theme of it is the journey of the Black Adept. This will be the first annual gathering of this. So we're going to try to do this every fall. And obviously it'll grow and get bigger, and there'll be more things added to it. So we got a nice event planned for that coming up at the end of the month. So again, a reminder from Friday, from about 9:30, 10 to 5 o'clock. There will be various different presentations on different topics. There will be a presentation on Luciferianism. There will be a presentation on herbs, working with herbs and magic. There will be a presentation on being a female and the feminine on the left-hand path. My sister Sonia will be doing that presentation. There will be Brother Jack is preparing something, which I believe is probably going to have something to do with Dawn. So there's going to be a multitude of different topics. That's going to be on Friday later in the evening, as I said before. we will meet back up and do our monthly ritual. That'll be at 8 o'clock. The next day, there'll be a class to tie it all in that I'll be doing at 12:30. And then we'll be meeting later in the evening on the beach. We'll be setting up an altar to do a drumming ceremony for the Igun, the Orishi, and the Loa, followed by a dinner afterwards on the beach. And then we finish up at the cemetery. So that is the 26th and the 27th. For information on any of the aforementioned, if you would like the flyer, you do need to request an invite so we do know you're coming. You can email me at khnum19@gmail.com, and I will get that flyer over to you with the information that you need on it. All right. Having said that, the topic I kind of want to get into tonight. I mentioned this on Sunday, actually, not last week. Now that I'm back in my regular, for now anyway, back on my regular routine on Tuesday evenings. We'll, again, keep Tuesday as a regular day. I mentioned on the last video that this would be the next topic. So I want to address this because this is important for a multitude of reasons. This is going to be, the core essence of why many of us set out on a path of consciousness, regardless, I'm talking about, regardless of where we're at right now. Most of us started out on whether we were raised religiously, be it Islam, Christianity, or Judaism. Most of us sought higher levels of knowledge or consciousness because of this topic here, death. Just what is it? A lot of us hid in some spiritual systems because of the fear or the unknown of death. We tried to find something cozy that catered to our emotions and our needs to make us feel safe from our insecurities. This is a reality, whether we're conscious of it or not. You've heard me mention over the years in different videos when I've done different topics on it that are related and connected to it. The reality is, first and foremost, you don't really 100% know what happens to you at this time of death, or what we call death. But we're going to demystify that by removing the spookism out of it. There are some things you can allude to. There is an understanding of the process. Now, we're going to go over two aspects tonight. We're going to go over the 8 emanations of the soul from the ancient Egyptian perspective, but it's more based on scientific findings, not just dealing with theories. And we're going to get into that. But first, and then we're going to tie it into, after we get into the essence of the soul, the demystifying process and how we can kind of, remove these false concepts from our mind created by Western religions. That's step one. Most Western philosophies / religions give you this ridiculous, concept of death. They create fairy tale realms. They create these, illusions of certain things. They make claims, quote unquote, that happen, during this process. All really are just based on just conjecture, faith systems. Okay. Now, understand on this path, there's a difference between having real faith based on facts that you can confirm for self, as opposed to blind faith, which can't be confirmed. You just solely put your trust in something that cannot be confirmed at all. So we're going to eliminate and be able to understand between the two. So we first have to eliminate from the mind the Western traditional concept via religion of this thing called death. That's just the finality of it is never fully explained. You never really get clear-cut answers. It's either fear is instilled in it, and by that fear of death is how most religious people are kept in line. And then you toss in the heaven and hell concept, and now you got a great mixture of fear, because now I create this parameter. If you're good, you will make it to this quote unquote vainglorious place called heaven. And they don't really fucking tell you what you're going to do when you get there. Basically nothing, float around on clouds And then if you're bad, you go to this other mythological place called hell to be tortured by some devil character with a pitchfork on a hot sauce bottle. These are all the ridiculous mythology. This is about as valid as Santa Claus. This is about as valid as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That's about how much validity there is to it. And it's sad in this day and time that grown, mature adults still believe in these mythological tales. So first and foremost is removing the mythology that was enforced upon us from day one. When I say day one, from the moment we proceeded out of the womb of our mother, most of us, regardless of where you're at now or what you know at this present day, most of us were indoctrinated with this. If it wasn't immediately through our family, it was via the school system, via various aspects of society, etc. So it's something that's embedded there psychologically, subliminally. It's just something we've been dealing with from day one. And as we've gone through this journey over the years, you can reflect back, each and every one of us who went through, obviously we all came through a different path. I'm not saying we all identically went through the same things, but we went through similar things. And as we started to grow and question, we said something's not right. There's got to be more answers, especially on this topic. There's got to be more to it. And we started to seek, whether some of us went into Eastern philosophies, whether some of us, went into various different, Hindu or Dravidian philosophies, etc. Some went to extreme left-hand path philosophies, etc. All for the search to that million-dollar question, just what is death? All right. So we're going to get into, again, we're going to debunk the myth and the faith. And as I said before on this path, it's about doing work. Doing real intense study and doing real work to gain a personal understanding for yourself. There's no other liberation or freedom like that. When you talk about spiritual sovereignty, real sovereignty, I ain't talking about Moorish sovereignty, which is a whole nother story. Don't even start on that shit. But when you talk about what is real sovereignty is being liberated from those things that bind you mentally, because there's nothing worse. It's mental slavery and indoctrination is 50 times worse, because remember, it's got to start there. If you can bound an individual or a group of people mentally by enslaving them with false information, indoctrination, you automatically going to have control over them physically. Now, as I said a million times before, though what we know as physical slavery, quote unquote, to an extent, and it's not true because there's some countries in the world that still actually practice slavery, believe it or not. You can look what's going on in Libya today. That's a whole nother story. Regardless of the fact, mental slavery is even worse than the physical slavery. The problem is we have a lot of mentally dead people walking around, right? And they're advocating, they're standing behind, and they're fighting and arguing over doctrines that are basically dead, that have not changed in thousands of years. Now, one of the basic foundations of metaphysics is what? Anything that doesn't change dies, right? We've all heard this term if you've studied any basic metaphysical information. Anything that doesn't evolve or changes dies. Now, for an example, if you look at, let's say the Catholic Church or the Catholic tradition, they really haven't changed anything. Now, don't confuse updating. Like when you look at the history of the Catholic Church, you got Vatican I and Vatican II. Like for an example, on the Vatican I, when they performed the mass, they would face, the back of the priest would be to the congregation, and he would face, where the tabernacle where they kept the Eucharist, which quote unquote represented Christ, and they would do the mass facing that way. They've made little adjustments, but what I'm saying is the foundation and the core really hasn't changed in any of these religions and spiritual systems. Even when you get outside, even in some of these Eastern philosophies, what keeps it there is tradition, because really a lot of these things are based on man-made traditions. Now, when it comes along, when we talk and discuss or work with aspects on this path, and you say the individual is at liberty and has the power to do whatever he or she chooses to make that adjustment and creating that path for themselves, that becomes a problem in the eyes of certain religious people, or people that have tunnel vision and think things are supposed to be the way that they see them. And that's the unique thing. You're at liberty on this path To be a god or goddess is having true spiritual sovereignty, not being bound by mental indoctrination, and understanding, one, look, just because somebody's doing something that you may not agree with, that doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it not right for you. Understand the difference. So we understand that as we work on this path, and we're able collectively to come together and combine all those different aspects and viewpoints. All right. So let's get into this real quick. All right. I'm going to take a couple. I've been using excerpts the last few weeks from Mindstar by Dr. Michael Aquino, the second edition. I've suggested people really get it because working black magic and understanding your objective, your subjective, the collective, subjective, like we talked about last week, this is going to be a telltale to really understand how powerful, quote unquote, your magic really is and how you really understand it. Because my thing is, you can, again, as I said last week, you can study all these different paths: vampirism, Luciferianism, hoodoo, voodoo, any of the African-based traditions, Kendoki, any of these things, Palo. But if you're not understanding truly, for you, I'm talking about understanding the full potential and power of your subjective and how that connects with your objective, you're basically just reading and getting a lot of and gathering a lot of information. Remember, this is not a path just about talking. This is not a path just about dabbling in stuff that you have an interest in that makes you feel good. You understand? Don't confuse that with actually being on this path. And I think some people do that sometimes because they just like to hear certain things talked about and it gets them all excited. But when you ask them, all right, well, what areas of work are you doing in this field? Like what body of work are you doing, to back up your enthusiasm / liking for it? And if you don't really have a body of work to support that, then you need to question yourself. What is it you're really doing? And is it any different from what other people are doing on other paths that just basically regurgitate shit that they learn? Because it's all relevant if you can't apply it. Understanding the process, how to apply it, is really getting the scientific and factual breakdown of your subjective and objective. Remember, greater black magic is brought into fruition by being able to tap into your subjective realms with a plural, because that's where the black magician goes to enforce his will to influence, or her will to influence a situation for a favorable outcome. When you hear that saying over the years that everything is 90% mental, 10% physical, we've heard this in different circles, be it sports, metaphysics, whatever it might be. You're going to find out in life that is true. Understanding the process of how that is true, well, that's a whole nother story. It sounds simple on the surface. It's just when you become, as I said last week, a reactionary being, you don't use those mental faculties. You solely rely on being reactionary, and that's usually what gets you in trouble. That's usually what sets you up for failure. All right. So let's go into this real quick. I will go back in the chat, take your questions, your comments. And again, if I didn't greet you personally when you first came in, peace and greetings to everybody. So let's go ahead and get into this. All right. First, we need to wipe out of our mind or rid ourselves of all of those false definitions of death that have been forced upon us via Western traditions and religions. All right. So, Death Demystified. From Terror to Transformation, section from the Mindstar, chapter 7. The obvious fulcrum of the concepts and processes addressed throughout Mindstar is the phenomenon of transition from physical to metaphysical human existence, what is commonly called death. Okay? Since death is not in fact death in the sense of a cessation of self-conscious existence, this chapter shines a harsher, more explicit light upon it. To explode and vanquish the conventional ignorant fear conditioning so deeply and constantly ingrained in human beings throughout their incarnate phase of self-aware existence. Death fear is physical, body, instinctive, easily the strongest and most unrelenting of all such emotions. Now, as I said before, we all have asked ourselves the question, why am I here? How did I get here? How did I come into existence? What's going to happen to me when this physical, quote unquote, existence ceases? A lot of that, when we reflect back, I'm sure all of us to an extent in this day and time, and especially if you're on this path, you have a better understanding of what death is. But if you really were honest with yourself, you would really have to say you 100% really don't know as far as what to expect, what's going to happen. And this was some of the driving force that led all of us to seek some level of truth, regardless if it was years back when we left conventional religion and said, look, there's got to be more to it. Some of us stayed in religion for that reason. And look at how many people you know today hide in it because of this fear, quote unquote, of death, the fear of the unknown. You're going to find out once you really understand this process, as I mentioned about sovereignty and liberation, it's like those chains or those bonds, being lifted off of you, right? All right. So death fear is physical body instinctive, easily the strongest and most unrelenting of all such emotions. Invalidating and rejecting it is one thing intellectually, but quite another viscerally. Even the most advanced and enlightened initiates can suddenly find themselves stricken and terrified by it. And that's why I said, even you might be a seasoned vet and have a lot of knowledge, but when it comes to this topic, you have to be real with yourself. There's still a lot, you question, you don't really know, or do you, is the question I should say. All right. Understand, for an example, we've all dealt with the loss of a loved one. I know we all have, I'm sure on some level, be it direct family, friends, etc. The thing that's you really have to ask yourself, we mourn, and sometimes we have to question, quote unquote, why we're mourning. Some of it is because it's selfish based, because we want that person to still be here, right? If we really understood death, we would be celebrating it, because as we get into the second part of this, it's going to kind of clarify that process, because really we are the ones that are in, quote unquote, a suffering existence. We've been falsely taught that what we call living, live, this existence, we think, and again, as I'm saying this, please stay grounded. I'm not asking anybody to become, spooked out as on some of these systems where you don't connect at all with the physical world. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying is understand how both kind of tie in together, understand how they connect, understand how to utilize your time here and master. It doesn't mean don't indulge. It doesn't mean don't enjoy anything physically, because that's what a lot of those right-hand fluffy paths will try to enforce upon you and teach you shit like don't be in the world, don't get yourself engrossed in anything physical, separates it. That's a bunch of bullshit, because that's to the extreme, and that again leads to suppression. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am saying is, when you understand this existence and how it connects to the next, you're really going to question what is really living and what is dying. Because as I said before, really, as we get older, we're living to die. We don't look at it like that. But really, it doesn't get any easier, right? As you get older, you have to worry about age settling in, your body changing, various diseases, the immune system becoming weaker, right? So really, what is this thing we call life and what is this thing we call death? We're going to talk about that, right? And again, this is not, I'm going to be honest with you, this is not probably going to be, and I just say it on the surface, a pleasant topic, but we remember, part of mastering this path is addressing your personal fears. You need to really go dig deep. What is it you fear? Do you have fear of heights? Do you have fear of certain creatures or animals? Do you have fear of death, right? This is important to address, because you're going to see a lot of these traumas that you're not aware of that might be ingrained on the subconscious mind could be holding you back and you're not aware of it, because fear comes in all shapes and forms. Okay. Don't look for the obvious. And the challenge on this path is not identifying the fears you're aware of. I mentioned the basic things on the surface. If you are an individual that maybe has fear of deep water or heights or something, you know, on the surface that's obvious, you know, that's one aspect, but I'm not talking about that. You need to also really do work to find out what's laying dormant in your subconscious that might be creating trauma. What things do you fear that you may not be aware of? Or maybe there's some things you kind of sense that you fear, but you're afraid to explore it. This is part of this process, and you'll find out a lot of it is connected, quote unquote. These fears are connected to, quote unquote, what we call death, right? If you use the basic things on the surface, right? If you have fear of heights, why? Because you feel something could happen to you and possibly death, right? If you have fear of flying, right? Some people fear flying, right? I'm using some of the basic things now on the surface. Fear of deep water, all of it, what? Connects back to death. You fear these things because you feel like something could happen to you and, quote unquote, you can die. What I'm trying to get you to see is you're going to find a lot of your fears emotionally and physically are linked into this, quote unquote, what we call death. Now, the question is why? Is it because you don't understand the process? Is it just the unknown of it creates the fear? But let's find out. All right. So as I said, this is not a read, joy, relax chapter. It's a rude awakening, a shock that will accompany you henceforth. Very much a matrix red pill. Its discourse ranges from the conventional to the extraordinary, pushing the limits of the reader's coherence and or confidence in that of the author. Now, remember, as I said before, and most of these authors say, don't just take their interpretation of it or their experience from their subjective on it. Make sure you do your research, right? All right. We're going out on some limbs here, but you won't need a sword. As with other super-rational concepts in Mindstar, which thereby are not reconcilable by your OU, your objective universe, exclusive laws of logic. You will need to apply the analytical tool of anamnesis, the dialectic precision of which will enable you to recognize truth. Let me say that again. Anamnesis, okay, is the dialectic precision of which you will be able to recognize truth. Let me clarify that. Not somebody doing it for you, because real truth isn't because you read something somewhere or you heard somebody say something in a lecture, in a discussion, etc. It's when you can analyze it. Even if you hear it, it makes you feel good, but you still need to confirm it for self. That's when it becomes a reality. It becomes real truth. And this is part of the process of doing work. We tend not to do that with a lot of things. And definitely on this path, that's something that you must do all the time. Even if it's something somebody says, it might resonate with you, you might like it, but have you really gotten to the core of it and found out what it really is and how it applies to you? Most people would have to say no. Okay. So it's to recognize the truth when you see it and exercise not of faith or trust, but of noesis, right? Non-initiate humanity habitually regards life as being either a purely physical, objective universe function or as a two-layered physical body with a non-physical soul, which may or not survive the body's cessation of metabolism and subsequent decomposition. The blue pill formula is termed materialism. The red pill later, idealism, right? Next section, who owns your body? The protagonist of the Matrix assumed he did until he awakened to discover it attached to a variety of parasitical mechanisms. Let's find out to what you might be hooked up to, right? It now gets into, which I'm not going to go into because I'm going to get into the 8 emanations. It goes into different aspects of your life: state, religion, profession, right? All these false things, because the core and understanding the essence of life and death is first understanding the soul. This is where this is leading to. But the false things we identify with is, for example, state, where you were birthed, what your ID says, right? We falsely identify with these things. Religion, right? certain spiritual systems. And that's why I said, don't even on this path, don't get caught up in using titles. I know we like to use the term left-hand path, right? But you have to be careful with that, because that can come across as religious to somebody else. Because now you may not like that, because say you say that to an individual that is not on the left-hand path, and they might perceive it as, well, when they look up left-hand path, they're going to get a lot of delusional bullshit. They're going to get certain spiritual systems that are affiliated with it, but it can come off to them as being a form of religion. Now, you're going to say, no, when I say left, I don't mean it. Yeah, but you know that, but they don't know that. So part of understanding this process is removing all titles from yourself. Now, I know we use certain terms, phrases, and titles to get certain points across, and that's okay. But when you're doing when you're doing your own personal work, you got to really eliminate all of those things from you. The problem is the insecurity of human beings feel the need to cling on to that. And sometimes the individual, because the average individual, you can't just tell, well, what are you? Well, I'm spiritual, right? That's not good. Well, what do you mean? Oh, well, you got to get specific. They want to, are you Buddhist? Are you Muslim? You Christian? You Jew? Are you atheist? Right? And I told you before, there's a trick in that word, right? Because the Greek word you'll find in the New Testament of the Bible for God is theos, right? Theos. And that's a trick in itself, because that's the Greek word for theory, right? The English word we use, theory, comes from the Greek word theos. So they are admitting to you, as I said in the past, that they have a theory of God. They can't confirm it. It's just their theory. And their theory of this God is some old man sitting in the sky on a throne, and he's controlling, the course of everybody's life. This is their theory. This delusional, invisible higher power that yet they give it some imagery, right? But yet can't really be confirmed, right? So they're telling you this is their theos, or theory of what God is, right? So there's a trick in that. And atheist too, right? There's a trick in that word, because really when you break down atheist, it's a theory. And atheists really have a theory on the whole God concept themselves. Their theory that, whether they believe in the Big Bang and how humans came into whatever that's still their theory of how life came into existence, right? It's still a creation theory. Because if you ask an atheist, well, how was the earth created? They will get into a lot of those, Darwin's theory and all those things they will get into, etc. The whole point being is we identify with a lot of these false concepts, right? It continues on your profession, your psychiatry, family, etc. Again, I'm not going to read all these familiars, yourself, right? There is the real you, as I mentioned before. So now, having gotten through the basics, let's go through the 8 emanations. Just what is soul? Let's break it down. We've heard some of these concepts, and we're going to go through a couple of different avenues of it. We've heard the breakdown of the Ka, the Ba, but I'm not talking about just from a surface explanation. Even though we might use the Egyptian concept of it, and we do use that strong on this path, but we need to get some core factual scientific evidence to support it now, all right? Because when you understand what is, now don't confuse soul and spirit. As I said before, there's 2 different things. Some people think both of those things are identically the same, and they're not. Okay, we got to understand the difference between that. The spirit is a reflection of the emotions, quote unquote, of the soul. And that's why, people always question, do animals have soul, or do they have a spirit? Whole nother story, but let's get into the breakdown of this. All right. To this point, we have first cleared the way of conventional religious and materialistic wreckage from the popular concept of the soul, right? We talked about life, death, and how Western religions, give you this false concept that, if you don't go to this place called heaven, your soul doesn't live on eternally, etc. Okay, we are now in position to identify the elements or emanations of the mind star as the Egyptians apprehended them. This is thus the core of this book, but it cannot be overemphasized that this is not a mere recitation for the reader's bemusement. It is a doorway, a map by which the individual can redirect the power of discretionary consciousness to its source, purification, and realization of immortality. Each of the following 8 emanations proceeds from the more OU-linked, which is objective universe, to the more SU-linked, subjective. Predictably, this makes the more basic ones that much easier to identify based on their familiar, if subconscious OU usage. A comparison may be made to Plato's Pyramid of Thought, which in his dialogues he stratified as ikasia, primitive emotion, pistis, ordinary active, reactive thinking, right? That's the term when I say not being, reactive, but being proactive, right? Dianoia, precise, logical, enlightened thought. And noesis, right? You heard that term just a few minutes ago. Intuition and apprehension of the ultimate good, agathon, right? Now, you'll hear that term used also with your personal demon, Agatha demon. You might have seen that in some left-hand path books. That is a Greek word. So when you're saying the agathodemon as it's pronounced, you're talking about your good or your higher self to you, right? These are terminologies because this has its reference and origin. That now, what's the connection between your agathodemon or your personal daemon, or whatever you want to refer to, and your soul? Well, when we say the real you, that's what we're talking about, right? What comprises the real you, your real essence? It'll be more. It'll explain itself as we go further down. The Egyptian priesthoods knew that each living creature was possessed of several existence emanations above and beyond the metabolic mind/body. All sentiment beings possess the first 4, right? These are ones we're familiar with: the Kat, the Ren, the Kabit, and the Ab. Beings endowed with the gift of Set, awareness of the isolate self-consciousness. The next 2, the Ba and the Ka, as well as in those of initiatory capacity and attainment. The next one, Sekhem, and in unique instances, the ultimate one, Ak, right? AKH. Accordingly, each of the following expositions is meant not just as something to be read, but as a personal application exercise. Upon being alerted to each emanation, redirect your thought inward until you find and recognize it in yourself. That's why I say it's not just about reading it. What good is it if you're just reading these things, but you're not applying it to self, right? You may be surprised at how effortless this is. As effortless and self-evident indeed as all of the great truths presented in Mindstar, each which you find perhaps to your surprise that you may know already. Welcome to Anamnesis. It is a gateway, a map to your personal Grail castle. Once you know that it exists and there is to be quested and found, you have only to 1. Yeah, let's go through them now. Khat, Khat. All right, the body emanation. The Khat is an integral with the being's physical body and is the original of what later lesser cultures would represent as the energy body. Now, also, if you're really paying attention to this, for those, you're going to also, if you really study, you'll understand how spirit possession works now. When understanding the energy body, when one is able to be, quote unquote, mounted, I hate to use the word possessed because unfortunately that word ties into a lot of negative religious connotation. So I don't really like to use that word. When one is mounted by the spirit, or when one is fully in the spirit, say at a Bende or Apollo gathering or voodoo gathering, you say, what creates this phenomena? Understanding the energy body. When an individual understands how this works and they're able to embody all aspects of it, it's different when you start to embody, quote unquote, if you're propagating that whatever particular spirit you might be working with or deity, right? What happens is when the individual lines their frequencies and vibrations with that energy and is able to tap into it and be absorbed by this energy body, they are now controlled, quote unquote, or in fully in the energy of that spirit. I'd rather say that than possession. Now, this is why the individual is able to do things while they're in the spirit, per se, that doesn't affect them, as opposed to things they wouldn't be able to do just in their normal existence. They might have certain aspects of strength. They might be able to tap into, he or she, certain awareness of an individual, and they never met that individual before. It might be their first encounter with them, etc. When you are able to tie into, because remember, when we're talking about the quote unquote spiritual realm, and you're raising your vibration and frequency to connect, you hear a term in alchemy called making yourself less dense. Well, all this discipline is part of the process. So we learn on this path to not worship these things, but embody them. And spirit possession, for lack of a better word, is part of it. Not to get sidetracked, but pay attention to some of the breakdowns of these 8 emanations, because if you're really trying to understand how does this work and how is that connected, well, it is. Trust me, it's connected. All right. All right. So the Ka is the integral with the being's physical body and is the original of what later lesser cultures would represent as the energy body, body of light, astral body, etc. In current field theory, it constitutes the life field of the person, controlling and directing its material counterparts, organization, regeneration, and span of existence. During physical life, it is coextensive with its material counterpart. After material death, it may remain with the corpse to serve as a medium for other emanations, right? Now, you've heard of, in Haitian Voodoo, what they call reanimating an individual. Some call it zombies, which I don't like to call that. There is a science of being able to still use, this is basically what this is saying here, in a nutshell. That is a reality, whether you believe it or not. And again, I don't ask you to accept that on face value. You would have to see it and witness it and experience it. And some of us have seen that, a body reanimated. I can attest to experience from that. And I wouldn't tell anybody to accept that unless they experienced it for themselves. Some of these things might seem far-fetched or bizarre, but you're getting the scientific breakdown now. It's showing you, because the spookism now is being removed. So now what this is going to do, as you understand these 8 emanations, you will understand how all this spooky shit now is eliminated. There's more scientific information at the core of this than we've ever been explained from the beginning. All right. Okay. Or it may merely linger near its remains. Jungians, called Jung, you might be familiar with him, that's what's called, perceive that the Ka as the earthbound anima, and in the oriental vision of the golden flower, it was known as the Kui. Teo, the undivided great one, gives rise to 2 opposite reality principles, darkness and light, yin and yang. These are at first thought of only as forces of nature apart from man. Later, the sexual polarities and others as well are derived from them. From yin comes chaun, the receptive feminine principle. From yang comes qian, the creative masculine principle. From yin comes ming, life. From yang comes xing, essence. Each individual contains a central monad, which at the moment of conception splits into life and essence. Right? These 2 are super individual principles, and so can be related to eros and logos. In the personal body existence of the individual, they are represented by 2 other polarities, a pale soul or anima and a hun soul or animus. All during the life of the individual, these 2 are in conflict, each striving for mastery. I hope you caught that, okay? We're talking about, okay, the bodily existence of the individual are represented by the 2 polarities. Okay? The soul and the body are in constant conflict with each other, striving for mastery. A death may separate and go different ways. The anima sinks to the earth as the Kui and a ghost van. Now, they left a trace of this, right, in religion, where they said from the dust of the ground you came, right? And the dust of the ground you shall return. But they never really explained what that really meant, because they're showing you what this concept is verified, because they are even admitting in modern day religions that there is a separation of the soul from the body. There is a separate, as this process just described, but it's now giving you more of a clearer breakdown. So when they're admitting that this takes place, but they're not really explaining, well, then what happens to the soul, right? When the physical decomposes and goes back to the essence, right? As they say, what now happens, quote unquote, to the soul? Well, we're going to get more clarity on it as we continue, right? It is the khat which is drawn into or activated from within a corpse in necromantic magical workings. This is also, if you really practice necromancy, right? This is the science of how you work necromancy, right? Invoking, activating certain energy forces, or as it says here, necromantic magical workings. And that's why I find it interesting when some people that I've run into over the years who say they work with necromancy, I don't really think they understand it. I found a lot of it to still be kind of religious on the surface. All right. And then it's going to confirm what I said earlier. As the reader may surmise, the khat is also the vehicle for the zombie practices of voodoo. And I just was talking about that a minute ago. So if you want to understand how reanimation takes place, understand the science of the khat, right? K-H-A-T. That's just one emanation, right? Now we're going to get into the Ren, right? And I really hope on this topic here, when I finish and get through these, that you can have some questions on this, because this is very important for you to understand, especially in carrying out, your work spiritually on a daily basis. All right. Ren, the name emanation. The Egyptians understood the power of names to identify, define, protect, and empower individuals. Now, I want to tie this into something basic. Not that it's mandatory, but you should have a spiritual or a magical name that you're known by. If you've done rituals with us, you know when we're in the temple or the chamber room, when we're doing certain invocations, there's certain spots where your name is placed. You should insert, quote unquote, your magical or spiritual name. Remember, there's a name or a Ren, right? I want to clarify this, because the Ren is not, when it's saying name, it's not what you know as your physical name. If your name is John, it's not talking about that. We're gonna clarify. I want to make this clear. There is a name that you're known by, and via that name, or when we get further into it, when said correctly, and if it links into you, it activates certain energy forces in you. This is why there was sacred names that individuals were known by, quote unquote, in sacred temples in different cultures. There was names they were known by, and only those inside the temple room or the chamber room knew those names. And those names were never used outside. So there's a name that you go by and known for, right? Which is your everyday name that you use. But you should have a magical or a spiritual name you use when you do work. Now, is it mandatory? Absolutely not. I would personally recommend it. But the key is, when choosing that name, you should be able to line up with the characteristics that the name represents. Because I said this before, when you run into a lot of these people that study these different dogmas and they take on these spiritual names, they take on names because they like the way it sounds. But you got to ask yourself, are you living up to what that name means, what that name represents? For an example, you will also find out as you go through different levels of learning, those names change. People that have known me over 20 plus years know my name has probably changed about 5 or 6 times. That's because you get to a certain level in your learning, and usually the name you take on usually identifies kind of where you're at or what you've kind of been raised up to. And usually it's conferred upon you by elders. You're usually recognized for that. Not so much just taking a name because you want to take it. For an example, you'll hear me basically just use Beniti, right? Beniti just means teacher, right? That's what Beniti means when you look it up. And it's funny how nobody ever asks me what that name means. And there's a reason for that. Okay. When you add the full part to it, when you say Baniti Amun Ra, it means teacher of the hidden one. Now, what that means in essence to me, I can't explain that to you. You get the idea what it means on the surface. But when I'm doing magical work, whether it's individually or collectively in the chamber room, that's the name that will activate the energy and things that I'm talking about here. It's not going to be activated by John or Tom or Kendra or whatever. Understand, when you get into the breakdown of the Ren, which we're going to finish in a second, understand we all know from basic study that Semitic languages or ancient languages obviously have certain flow or vibrational frequencies and tones to it, right? Even when you get into these clowns that are debating about the Metu Neter, right? I don't ever hear them really getting into that part of it. But there is an aspect of it by way of those tones and frequencies and vibrations. Even when you do mantras, it's the same thing. When you're doing a mantra in an ancient language, as you get into the rhythm of that mantra and the tone of it, it starts to open up energy centers within you, right? You start to have certain experiences depending on, quote unquote, what mantra you're chanting. For an example, I'll do a lot of Kali mantra magic, right? And I'll use Bal Cadman's book, which I've mentioned many times before, and I think is a great book if you're looking to do mantra magic or mantra work with Kali. I know when you get locked in from experience on working any of those mantras, you just go to a place that I'm trying to put in physical words. How I always tap into the Kali energy, I always, see her as a very, and it's the way my mind's eye sees it. I always visualize, like when I need things eliminated from me, I always visualize her with that, those swords, right? Those certain, distracted by something on the TV. Those certain swords or knives that cuts away all of those things that might be weighing or holding you down. And I'll visualize her going around counterclockwise and kind of literally, it might sound a little bit bizarre, but slicing me up. And as I see that blood kind of being released from the body, there's things being removed, you understand, in that. It's just a visualization that I do that works for me. I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody else. Sometimes when you're doing these mantras, you get so locked in. For an example, when you hit that right vibration frequency and tone, right, you start to kind of, you're there, you're conscious that you're there on some level, but the physical body, it doesn't really exist. So you're raising your vibration and your frequency up. It's kind of like opening, quote unquote, a porthole or another dimension, if you want to say, for lack of a better word, where you now break what we call the time barrier, right? This is all connects to the power of Ren, right? Which I'm going to get into a little bit more. This all connects to being engulfed or totally engulfed in the spirit. This is how you focus when you're doing ritualistic work in those areas to, quote unquote, use a term we can connect to, tap into the spirit, right? But let's finish with this, all right? So I know this all started with, make sure if you're using a name, make sure you've thought it out, choose it wisely, okay? Because there's people, it amazes me. Again, like I said, you're not obligated. It's not for, there's people I know been on this path for years and they still going by their regular name. You should pick and choose a magical / spiritual name, right? Okay. Most conspicuously in the various names taken by each pharaoh, collectively and separately, each name affected the very essence of the person, and the greatest curse, as also illustrated in literature and film, was to be denied all names. Externally, a name can be used to summon or compel, whether physically incarnate or not. The Natiru also have the power and the discretion to give names as well, as take them, and through such names to take form and voice. Some will find on their path this is true. And this I can attest to from experience. Sometimes in your work, your name can be given to you via your work. You might be working with a particular archetype or a deity, and that's where the realization of your name comes from. I'm not saying that's going to happen for everybody, but that's sometimes the course of action that takes place. This is really important to understand, because in that revelation, if that has happened to you, understand the breakdown and essence of that name, because really what it's really revealing to you is the core essence of who and what you really are. This is important to understand, okay? And it goes on a whole more deeper level, but for the individual that has, let's say, that personal experience / revelations, is personal, okay? All right, so that's the Ren. The Kabit. I'm going to get through them. I might have to go through them a little faster. It's more than I thought. The Kabit, Khabit, Kabit, the shadow emanation, right? This is the connection of the still incarnate Kat with the life forces of the natural material, enabling it to function as the organizing and controlling energy, the individual life field. If the Kabit is destroyed, the life field de-energizes and the physical body expires. This is how death actually, this is a scientific explanation. This is how death, quote unquote, sets in. All right. In black magic, the Kabit can also be sent out by its owner as an instrument of influence upon others. So now when you hear me say, how does a black adept go into their subjective realm to enforce their will? Well, here's your answer right here. See, I told you this shit was work. This ain't just about reading shit, making yourself feel good. I don't care. I don't give a fuck what it is. You might like vampirism, but do you understand what vampirism is? Vampirism is no. All right. So how do you do that? By the individual, right? Okay, can send out their Kabit, right, by way of text. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not just saying it randomly and it sounds mystical and fucking spooky, but if you caught last week, and if you have to go back and revisit it later, tomorrow or whenever, go look at the last video, because that I went through the subjective and the objective and connected both so you can get to this point, because this is how a black magician / black adept is able to work black magic. All right. After the physical body is destroyed or no longer needed, the Kabit becomes an avatar of the Natir Anubis, right? Overseeing guidance of the non-initiate consciousness through the incoherence of the Tuat into the stabilization of Amenti, right? The underworld. An initiated consciousness needs no such guidance. So this is where they get that story from, or that concept. They were trying to relate something that actually takes place on a conscious level, right? Remember, when we read a lot of those stories and we say metaphorically, they symbolize something that understand. They call it what? The Egyptian mysteries for a reason. They're a mystery when they're unknown, but when you demystify them, right? They're not a mystery now to the initiate, right? The ab, the heart emanation, right? We've all seen this in Ma'at, right? We've seen this in the weighing of the scales, right? The physical locus of an individual identity and conscious, hence the bridge between the OU of the Natiru, or the archetypes and the gods, and the SU of the four metaphysical emanations. It is through the ab that an individual realizes and recognizes incarnate identity, your heart chakra, right? Where do they say the seat of emotion? Where does divine love, or as they say in Eastern mysticism, divine ishq, really reside? Where do you really tap into it? Well, this is part of understanding what the heart chakra really is. I'm talking about. I hope you're catching this. I've talked about many times before. Don't confuse illusionary love, physical love, with this type of love, right? When we talk about the app, okay, when we talk about understanding truth, identity, Where that resonates and emanates from is your ab, your heart, right? You all experience this on a multitude of levels when you feel different emotions. You get a certain, right, feeling there. That's just basic common sense. But let's continue, then we'll talk a little bit more about this, all right? So I want to repeat that last part. It is through the ab that an individual realizes and recognizes incarnate identity and uniqueness. And following destruction / expiration of one's body, it is through the ab that one can re-enter the objective universe as a ghost through possession, right? So now you're getting further explanation of how that spiritual process works. So when we say that the spirit or the archetype can come through an individual, well, that's when you know it's coming, because you feel it rise up through the ab or the heart. That's how you know it's getting ready to come, and I can attest to that from experience. As it builds up, it starts to rise through there. Some could call it that Kundalini fire, or a type of burning, if you want to utilize that. I'm just trying to use terminology to explain. Okay, this is what starts to happen, right? Let's continue. Okay, as goes through possession, more precisely, merge it with another incarnate ab, right? You and the spirit, right, become one, or through thought transference. It is also in the ab that the strength and quality of one's ma'at, inclination to good and evil, or evil, reposes. This is echoed in the later Indian mythologies of karma, and was the reason for the posthumous weighing of the heart against the feather in Egypt. And that's why I just mentioned that in the beginning. After bodily death, the ma'at within the ab overwhelms it completely, so that any subsequent manifestation in the OU is likely to be an extreme concentration of either beneficence or malevolence. And that's going to be based on the individual's perception. Okay, so that's important to understand. All right, I'm going to try to just get through the last couple here, so then we can go take some questions and comments. So I'm going to try to, for the most part, get through majority of it, just so you can get an understanding of it. I would suggest, again, you get the book and study this and read it on your own, because if there's any level of information that's really going to help you understand what this path is about, I'm telling you, it's going through this type of information. All right, it's work, because again, people got this false concept of what, quote unquote, lack of a better word, left-hand path black magic is. They've got this warped. Look, this path is more spiritual than anything that's out there. Trust me when I tell you. I don't care what it is. And it's funny when you get, as I like to call them, your Hotepers and your Alafir and your Ashayers, they don't really understand, quote unquote, what this path is really about, because they think in their mind it's something so negative and evil by all the false indoctrination they've been filled up with. And and again, I'm using a term you can grasp. If you're looking for a path that's highly spiritual in nature, trust me when I tell you, there's nothing more highly spiritual in nature than this path, because it incorporates everything in. All right. So let me finish, and then I'll go through the chat. I'll answer your questions and your comments. All right. So let's go now to the Ba, the fifth emanation, the core emanation. This is each sentence being sense of self-awareness, of unique and absolute distinction from everything else, both other sentient beings and the entire objective universe. Thus, it is the manifestation or gift of Set, the natir of non-nature, in each so-conscious entity. The Ba becomes stronger through increased self-exploration and realization. The initiatory process of Keper, right? Some say Keper, spelled, you might see it spelled Khepera. You'll see it likened to a symbol that you know as the scarab beetle. But Keper means coming into being and realization of who and what you really are, right? That's what this path is really about. Not who you think you are, not who you want to be, not who you're trying to be. Keper is coming into the awareness of who and what you really are. And you constantly through life have moments of Keper. You can call it an aha moment. You can call it whatever you want. When you look at The deity Keper in ancient Egypt, right? As it's resurrected, ties into the rising of the sun and resurrects every morning. It represents regeneration and renewal. That's what this is about. Because when you first set foot on this path and travel, you go through that moment. You're on this path because you are trying to remanifest everything, right? Keper means to remanifest and make that what you know anew. What it means to make it anew is Keper, coming into awareness of who and what you really are. When all the illusions, it mentioned the gift of Set, right? Or the isolated consciousness of Set, the non-nature, meaning an individual that's, again, as I mentioned many times in the past, that's not controlled or is not a conformist, is a self-thinker, right? And that's why I went over all the critical thinking stuff last week, right? You must be able to be a critical thinker to be a god or a goddess, not just say it. Not just say it because you read some books and you're identifying with something cultural and it makes you feel good. That does not make you a god or a goddess. What makes you a god or a goddess is by the body of work that you put in and have evidence to support it. All right. Anybody can make that claim. Okay. And when we say god or goddess, I want to make this clear to maybe somebody that might be newer watching these videos. We're not talking about the definition in the sense of your mythological, monotheistic, biblical, or Quranic God. That's not what we mean, because that's another system of indoctrination that people struggle to get by, because they hear the word God and their mind starts to just wander off into some religious theory of who and what God is. That's not what we mean when we say that. Okay. God simply means, or goddess simply means, somebody that's in control of themselves and their immediate surrounding and environments, and they're in control or the governor of their spirituality. Nobody else has that control. So they make the decisions for them what's right or wrong. That constitutes a real god and goddess. Are you doing that? Are you still a conformist? Do you do shit because everybody else is still doing it? Are you part of an organization or a group because it's covering up some insecurity? It just makes you feel good, or you need to be in the groups that what? I'm just bringing certain aspects of this up. All right. So Keper, right? Unlike natural initiation, which draws the individual into alignment, harmony, and ultimately conscious absorption into an indistinction from one or more of the natural material, Keper of the Ba does not dissolve the self into Set, but attains and sustains a cohesive essence of its own. That's what makes it isolated, right? This is also explaining this concept via the story of Set being the only Natir that's able to slay a Pep. This is talking about you, right? When that chaos comes to the surface, when fear, and this is why this is why we're talking about this subject, because fear and death comes from the emotion of a Pep, or the Apep energy. As I said before, a Pep comes to you between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. When you're laying in your bed at night, worrying about certain things, that's a Pep manifesting via your nature, right? When you're worrying at those wee hours in the morning, say of bills or your business or family or whatever problems you have going on, 99.9% of the time, a Pep will come to you during them hours, right? Set being that isolated aspect that completely separates from all that, what made him unique. And that's what that story was trying to tell you, what takes place within yourself. All you got to do is go in. It's funny how people study Egypt, but they don't ever point any of this out. Set was the only one that was able to slay a Pep. What did that really mean? Because remember, Ra spent his whole nights, right? Spent his whole nights from midnight to from the wee hours of night till daybreak, keeping a Pep at bay. You can never slay him. But see, the isolated consciousness of Set knew that you can destroy a Pep, but he always knew a Pep would remanifest, right? But in that remanifestation, Set now had the formula, how every time when that chaos came, he was able to make order out of it. But knowing once you dissolve whatever chaos comes over the horizon and you dissolve it and master it, know that there's something else behind it. But the difference is now you are geared with the armor and the tools to deal with that chaos. That's why chaos is not necessarily a bad thing. And this is why you hear the term chaos out of chaos comes order, right? So this is important to understand, because we all are going to go through our chaotic moments in life or our pep moments in life. But understanding that a pep energy and how it resides within you, you will understand how fear works and resonates. And the only thing that can control, master, and destroy it is by you tapping into the isolated consciousness of Set, the real Prince of Darkness, not some mythological religious character. Because, and again, this is just my take and experience on it. I've found, as I said before, all right, when you use the term Satan, for an example, which just means the adversary, right? And it's really the same thing, adverse to all of the things that we just discussed. But when you start approaching exclusively the archetype as the adversary, as something antithesis to the monotheistic God, that becomes just as religious as Christianity. You may not be aware of it. You may not think on the surface. That's why we don't approach it real path of self-mastery, left-hand path. We don't approach it through those eyes. Now, having said this, I want to make this clear. As I said before, when you apply a Luciferian aspect of it, okay, when you apply that mentality or mindset, if there are people that choose to take that approach, that's their prerogative. And that's why I mentioned that. Don't mean you have to agree with it, but there are people that are going to take that approach. I would not recommend it. Again, you do what you want, because I think what that does is it still creates a security blanket for the individual to stay safe in their insecurities, because it still takes the onus off the individual to be the master. That's why I never, and anybody I do work with or anybody that we built, etc., we don't take that approach. Okay. All right. The anamnesis, or remembered knowledge experienced by the slave boy in Plato's Meno, is perhaps more accurately described as the physical process, stimulus / response, brain reaching into the ba for bits of its immortal eternal wisdom. But this is akin to reaching for a coal in a hot fire. It is stressful to do, and the result can be held only for the fleeting moment without further stress. The superficial physical self, which through material hits continuously, reassures itself that it is the only self, is shaken by exposure to its falseness, its nothingness. It backs away from such close encounters, dismisses them as illusions, fantasy, imagination, etc., and hastens to rebuild its fortress of material sensation walls. Absent setting orientation and initiation, a ba simply continues as one's sense of identity. Thus, the essential self, around which all the other souls coalesce and recognize themselves. Within non-initiates, this results in the ba being sensed as a dreamy, meditative state of being, which, if indulged in with persistence and intensity, leads to its overwhelming the other souls, hence nirvana, right? So we're really getting now what nirvana means, right? You hear that Hindu term, nirvana. Well, that's what nirvana is. And similar states of ba ecstasy. Now, as I said before, you heard me talking, I don't knock it. There's this big thing within the last couple of years, whether it's ayahuasca or DMT, people using hallucinogens. But that's what the purpose of these hallucinogens is to do, to have that quote unquote nirvana experience. And basically what you're doing is, quote unquote, you're creating this ba ecstasy that is talking about here. Now, having said that, on the flip side, I explained this before. You have the ability, whether you choose to use hallucinogens or not, to be able to utilize it with quote unquote outdoing it. It's very possible when disciplined and practicing and putting things into practice the correct way. You can obtain this ba ecstasy at will when you discipline and teach yourself the correct way. And this is going to help you understand. This is going to remove and demystify all the spookism of what really is life and death. Because when you understand these 8 emanations, you're going to understand that really, quote unquote, I'm not saying this so you could speed up your physical death process. You're going to understand those that are now passed on are probably in a much better situation than you would ever be in. Okay. I want to make that clear. So I love when people say they're in a better place. Right? When I hear that, I get so tempted to say, well, really fucking explain that. Break that down to me. What do you mean they're in a better place? Well, here you're getting a breakdown. We know why they're in a better place. I know what that means, but I can't stand when somebody just randomly says it and don't know what the fuck they're talking about. It bothers me because it shows that they're indoctrinated with religious rhetoric. They're not saying it from this perspective. They're saying this because they're trying to falsely implant in your mind they're in some illusionary place called heaven being coddled by this old man God. That's fucking bullshit, okay? All right. 6. We got 3 more. We're almost through. We're almost there. Ka, the transmigration emanation. The Ka is the complete mirror image of all 8 natural and non-natural emanations fused into an avatar. Doppelganger or Horla, a completely metaphysical remanifestation of oneself. You hear that term avatar through Dravidian or Hindu spirituality, right? An avatar can utilize this process over and over, right? You've heard many people in the past come over the years and say they are avatars, right? They are incarnation of many different beings, some quite fucking spooky. You've heard this used in positive and negative ways. But this is really what, in essence, we're talking about here when we talk about avatars, right? I'm getting a massive migraine right in the center here as we're talking about all this stuff. Right on the bridge of the nose and right over here. All right. A completely metaphysical remanifestation of oneself, which can exist and displace without limit, both within the non-natural universe generated by one's Ba and within the physical universe of the natural material as well. It is the Ka that through the app enters the natural universe, right? Now, remember we talked about the app and how these things, the doorway and the gateway they use through, or how they're able to enter, right? Enters the natural universe through identity gates, such as pictures or statues of the individual or utterance of the individual's name. Another tip there about the Ren thing, right? Because when you understand the sacred name, you can go to that story, right? Of Aset and Ra, right? How is she able to tap into the core of the essence of Ra's magical powers? Because she knew his sacred name. Remember when you read the story, he gave her the bullshit one first. Remember, he tried to divert her. And she knew, because she understood this process, because she knew that power didn't start to come up through the ab, right? She didn't feel it. So when that name, when he tried to deceive her and give her the false name, right? She didn't feel the power. So she knew, she said, that's not the right name. You didn't give me the correct name. She knew when she got his sacred name. Now, remember, the sacred name wasn't a physical name. I'm not talking about that. It was a tone that activated his power, right? It was a certain way that it was uttered, right? There's a part of this path we call performative utterance, right? When you're doing invocations, you must have passion and power behind them. And again, when we do, there's a lot of this in the group rituals that we do. And the one coming up at the end of the month is going to have a lot of performative utterance. So that story was telling you a lot about this process here. So she knew when he gave her the fake name, tried to divert her, not knowing she knew this process. She said, that's not the name. And how she knew was she didn't feel it coming through the gateway. She didn't feel that kundalini. She didn't feel it rising up and emanating through the ab. And she knew there was no power in what he had revealed to her, right? And she said, try again. Now, this story might sound like kind of fucked up. Like, why would you do this, to family? But don't look at it on the literal surface. What it's showing you, really place yourself in this story at that moment. You are, male or female. At one point in this journey, you were that asset of Isis because you did not know. Right? But you got to a point in your spirituality where now you desired and craved to know. You studied, you were on this path, and you also had the right to know. Right? And liken it to how you adjust that in everyday life, where you got certain individuals that want to keep shit for themselves because in knowledge, there's what? Power. So if I know something you don't know, that makes me more powerful than you. This is how all these cult leaders and groups and organizations keep control, because they create this illusion that there's some great secret. Join my group or organization and you're going to get some secret, and you never get the fucking secret. And as I told you before, here's the secret. The secret is there is no secret. If I can create the illusion that I have some great secret and keep stringing you along and never really give it to you, I can keep you controlled like a puppet. Well, put yourself in Aset's position. She had done everything she needed to do up until that point on her spiritual journey, but still knew what she was missing and felt like it was being kept from her. Well, just like her, anybody else had the right to obtaining that level, quote unquote, of knowledge. Don't get caught up in the little bit of it, because when you make it religious, when you say, that was disrespectful to Ra. Really, when you read a lot of the stories of Ra, I'm saying this, Ra at one hand can be very powerful, mighty, but at the same token can be very vulnerable. That represents us too. Because look how, whether it's with a Pep, whether it's with Asset, look how he was vulnerable. So one can be very strong, powerful, and wise, but yet still have areas of weakness. Now put yourself again in that perspective. We all have that aspect of Ra, where sometimes you could become over emotional and controlling, where you become vulnerable to those situations, like even with a Pep, right? He was attacking it the wrong way, right? And Set realized, man, you got to separate yourself from all of that way of thinking, all of that approach. You got to throw that shit out the window completely, because it don't work. So we see reflected in those stories aspects of ourselves, is what I'm trying to say. That's how you should look at it, right? I know people get caught up in it literally, but that's the wrong way to approach it, because then you kind of get into the position of a religious person that reads the Bible. Same thing. When they put themselves in there literally, it opens them up for a lot of inconsistencies and contradictions, right? All right. Okay. Let me finish this. All right. I forgot where I left off. Oh, the Ren. Okay. As well as through conducive locales such as temples and geological and architectural anomalies. While the Ba may particularly posthumously lose awareness of itself through the paradoxical expansion of that consciousness into its entire perceptive field, the Ka remains immortality finite, distinct, and otherness separate. This is explaining to you how you're able to, we all are individual and unique in that way. This is explaining it, right? Pay attention to this, right? Thus, in an expressive, active sense, it becomes the externally identifiable individual beyond physical death. Nowhere in the Ka better illustrated than in initiate Bram Stoker's The Jewel of Seven Stars. Film treatments of this work, such as Hammer's Blood from the Mummy's Tomb and more recent The Awakening, I definitely suggest you see that, have done a grotesque disservice. In Stoker's original text, it is in no sense a horror story, but rather a fascinating and romantic mystery. Who was Terra of ancient Egypt? This marvelous sorceress queen who took with her to her tomb only a ruby scarab inscribed with the constellation of the thigh, which is the bull of Umbos of Set, right? Our great bear and the hieroglyphics love and men-ab patience. Listen to the words of the woman of our own era with those Ka Terra came gently to merge. Now, I don't know if I should read this part. This is actually, yeah, maybe I should. Yeah, we're almost there. So listen to this. Now, you might have read this text. We're going to read it real short, the short section. Pay attention to the words, because when you're using performative utterance, you have to learn to connect visualization techniques by way of this process that we just went through. When you're in the chamber room, and for those that have come to rituals before or are coming, let's say at the end of the month, this is where your focus should be, or how you should approach it per se, right? So here's the text that of Terra or Ka Terra that they were alluding to. I can see her in her loneliness and in the silence of her mighty pride, dreaming her own dream of things far different from those around her, of some other land far away under the canopy of the silent night, lit by the cool, beautiful light of the stars, a land under that northern star, whence blew the sweet winds that cooled the feverish desert air, a land of wholesome greenery far, far away, where were no scheming and malignant priesthood, whose ideas were to lead to power through gloomy temples and more gloomy caverns of the dead, through an endless ritual of death, a land where love was not base but a divine possession of the soul, where there might be some one kindred spirit which could speak to hers through mortal lips like her own, whose being could merge with hers in a sweet communion of soul to soul, even as their breaths could mingle in the ambient air. I know the feeling, for I have shared it myself. I may speak of it now. Since the blessing has come into my own life, I may speak of it, since it enables me to interpret the feelings, the very longing soul of the sweet and lovely queen, so different from her surroundings, so high above her time, whose nature put into a word could control the forces of the underworld, and the name of whose aspiration, though but graven on a starlit jewel, could command all the powers in the pantheon of the high gods. And in the realization of that dream, she will surely be content to rest. Now, that's not a bunch of jargon, because remember up there, it explained, remember, she went, right? Went to the tomb only with the ruby scarab of the constellation of the Thigh of Set. What she was basically saying here, she was breaking down in her interpretation of what the gift of Set. She's explaining once she's separated from all of those things, she uses the temples and the structure and the ritual. I mean, she got into there's a lot of different metaphors in this passage here, but she was explaining as she was making this transition or going through a transition, she wanted this to be known before she made the transition. She had officially connected with the awareness of her Kepler. She really understand who and what she was and how she connected to it. Now she's using a lot of metaphor and imagery to explain this. So when we're studying this, we need to take something like this. When we're studying this, how can we apply that to ourselves in this day and time? Yes, it might be written in a time frame at that time remember, they're using certain imagery that was there at that time that they connected with. So now, how can one read that? And this is part of magic too. This is part of working this back. How can one read that, take that, and adjust that, bring it into 2018 and say, I can connect to this on this level. You understand? All right. All right, we're almost there. In love and patience, we are taught the secret of true immortality. In love and patience. What do they say in most spiritual schools? The hardest school to master is what? The school of patience. The Sufis teach that, right? The Sufis teach that's one of the most critical schools that one must master to really tap into what I mentioned earlier, divine ishq, right? That's a term you'll hear in Sufism. Tapping into that divine love, right? Ishq is love. In order to really understand divine love, one must master patience, right? It's not a coincidence that the ab or the heart center, which connects you to that heart chakra, is the root of all this. One of the most important chakras, right? But one must be grounded in the root. That's why when understanding the root and the heart, when you're trying to connect the objective and the subjective, if one's not grounded in their OU, they tend to have problems, okay? So there's a connection between both. So through love and patience, we are taught the secret of true immortality. Not the repulsive reanimation of corpses, anastasis, nekron of Christianity, nor the vague confusion of reincarnationalists, but the infinite radiance of one's mind star by its most magnificent expression and with a serene transcendence of natural time. The last two souls are unique in that they must arise from the individual and require initiate consciousness to do so per the formula of Kepler. I have come into being and created that which has come into being. So you realize at the end of the day, the reality is it's only you. You are the God that creates or destroys, right? The sooner you come to that realization, you are the one that creates your problems and you are the one that creates the solutions. You are the one that is responsible for your successes and you're also responsible for your failures. And you could go, no, but see, I was put, no. You're there, you were put, you hear this old phrase, you're where you're supposed to be because that's where you're supposed to be, right? We hear that, but we don't really know what it means. You understand? That's what that means. That's what it's trying to say. All right. Two more. Second. S-E-K-H-E-M. Sekhem, right? The neater emanation, while the term Sekhem is ordinarily translated as power, this is misleading because it is power in a very rarefied sense, that emanating from the Neteru themselves. For this reason, it is also described as the power of the stars through which the Neteru manifest in the natural universe. The Sekhem combines the ab as in effect a temple within one's consciousness to draw down the essence of one or more adored Neteru to indwell therein, right? So possession, to take root, to draw down the essence of the Natira or the gods or the archetype to dwell within. So this is what I mean when I say on this path, this process, it's about embodying the aspects, per se, in this case, of the Natira or the gods or the goddesses, not worshiping them. So we're not trying to worship them. We're trying to become what they represent. We're trying to embody the energy that they are able to manifest via through us. Because we know by way of those different energies, vibration, and frequencies, they utilize and suit certain purposes. As a magician, we need to be conscious of which ones we need to connect with at certain times for certain reasons. This is true magic. This is the true process of working, quote unquote, with deity. You understand? All right. Activation of the Sekhem has another effect. Every incident infuses the initiate with more of the Natir, invoked to the cumulative degree that the initiate's personality becomes accented by the Natir's seeing as the Natir sees, meaning you're now looking through the eyes of God when you do this. You're not worshiping. You hear this term in ancient Egypt called putting on the mask of God, right? You hear this in a lot of metaphysical circles. You'll hear this in be a Dravidian doctrine. You'll hear this in Tibetan doctrine. You look through the eyes of God, or you've now become like God, all right? All right. So you're seeing as the Natir sees, speaking as that Natir would speak, acting as that Natir would act. Hence, it is the Sekhem which makes possible and ultimately consecrates priesthood of a Natir in the individual so aligned. Once this transformation has taken place, it cannot be undone. That's important. That's why I tell some people, sometimes when you work certain aspects of this path, you got to understand what you're invoking, what energy you're working with. Because sometimes you might be connecting to something that you may not activate it all the time, but can't be removed. It's there. You've attached it to part of yourself. When you tap into some of these energies and frequencies, you remember you're connecting to something greater than the mundane, in the sense that if you're not really aware of what you're doing, you may not be able to disconnect from that energy, is what it's saying. Okay, and I'm not saying that to scare anybody or sound spooky. I'm saying that to educate yourself. Understand what the fuck it is you're doing. And at most, it may be sublimated or repressed, meaning you might think it's gone, or you might just stop acknowledging and working with it, creating the illusion that it's gone. But trust me, it's still there, is what it's basically saying. But only at great cost to the priest or priestess' very sanity. Now, the reason why I mentioned sanity there, and I'm not going to get too much in there because I've talked about that in the past, make sure you don't open yourself up to something. You know, there is that part of the mental aspect. You don't want to open yourself up to something you may not be prepared for. And I know the next question that's emanating there, well, how do I know if I'm prepared for it? Well, the very fact that you got to ask yourself, am I prepared for it, is the answer. You're not. You'll know you're prepared for it when you just dive right into it. You have no doubts. You have no concerns. That is your agatho demon, your personal demon, speaking to you, saying it is time. So that's how you know. It's that simple. It's the best way I can put it into words. If the very fact you have to go, is this right for me, or should I do it? There's your answer. You shouldn't, because you're still second guessing it. You still got doubts. You still got concerns. I try to explain that to so many people over many years. It's the best way I can put it into words. When you got that pure confidence that you just want to dive in, that you ain't got no doubts, and you have that pure confidence, that's how you know you're ready. It's that simple. All right. All right. The last one. We've finally gotten to the end of the road. Ak, the star emanation beyond the priesthood of the Sekhem, is the Ak, AKH, in which the initiate rises to the company of the Natira as one of their essence. If not of them absolutely, such one is indistinguishable from the actual Natira. Except by the Natira themselves, such a mode of existence departs completely from all concern. This is what I'm trying to tell, what I was just explaining. Such a mode of existence departs completely from all concern with physical displacement, with natural universal references or boundaries, manifestation or action, and effects otherness only by the radiance of its presence. While it does not destroy any of the other emanations, it permeates all of them, such that henceforth they all exist in conformity and concert with it. They all work in harmony, right? And to sum it all up, it finishes with a short paragraph, which I will read. Conventionalist blinders. What conventional Egyptology calls the Egyptian soul varies from 3 to 11 parts, taken arbitrarily from the multitude of Old and New Kingdom magical and funerary texts, favored by the Egyptologist offering his translation. What quickly becomes commonly evident is that these treat the entire subject, as indeed the rest of the Egyptian metaphysics, as nothing more than a primitive fairy tale, an entertaining curiosity, but certainly nothing to take seriously or apply as a key to reality. Only from the symbolists who do not make the fatal mistake of regarding hieroglyphs as nothing more than an alphabet can the modern mind move, as herein beyond the superficial and quaintly silly to the authentically experimental, the apprehension of the true immortal and eternal mind star. All one needs to do is to focus one's conscience past the physical sensory prison of the cot, the body, right? We're stuck in that sometimes. As you seek and find each emanation, you will realize it super rationally beyond the limitations of the cot realm alphabetics. Expect this. Don't make the mistake of dismissing it as mere imagination. You are unlocking a far greater reality, not merely corrupting the most crude and confining physical sensory illusion of it. All right? I'm going to stop there. I think, and I would hope, all right, that puts some clarity on that. What I'm going to do now, I know there's questions and comments. I'm going to go through the chat room. I have to step away one brief second, so give me about 30 seconds. If you got some questions, I'd suggest you start typing them in now so I can get through that within a reasonable time. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds just to kind of absorb that in. Maybe you got some questions that come to mind. That's a lot. And if that didn't raise no questions within you, if that didn't spark something within you, then something's wrong with you. No offense. You should want to be inquisitive, that this should really spark you to really now grab. And I hope the part of the kabit stood out, right? Where the individual is able to send their kabit, that you go into your subjective and the individual is able to send their kabit, whether it's to an individual or for a certain situation. That's how one is able to enforce their will. This is how black magic, this is the science of real black magic, not that spooky ass Hollywood bullshit and shit you pull up on the internet. This is what we mean. This is what we're about. If you wanted a brief discourse on what this path is about and what black magic really is, that's what it would be. And most people wouldn't think that that's what we're talking about. I'm talking about, when I say most people that are under this illusion of the preconceived definitions of what black magic in this path is. That's why I say that. So just give me 30 seconds. I will be right back. All right. And then I'll take the questions and go through the chat. All right, so I'm going to go to the top of the chat. So again, be patient. I will get to your questions. I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. All right. So let's see. Again, if I didn't greet you personally, peace and greetings to everybody in the room. If you came in after the fact, after I started. And again, real quick, before I go into the questions, I know there's more people here now. Again, if you are still interested in coming to the event at the end of the month, send me an email. We have the whole itineraries finished for the 2-day event. We'll probably cut that off next Wednesday. I know some of you has contacted me. I know like Sister Manny and a few people have made, already got their tickets for people that are traveling out of state. So if you're still interested in coming, just send me an email. That's in the description box, khnum19@gmail.com. All right, so let's see what we got here. All right, so peace and greetings to everybody. So let's skip some of that. All right, what else we got? All right, so first thing I see here is by Yvette. Since Yvette, I was raised to believe that our souls went to God upon our death and that we had no conscience until, Jesus came back. Again, classic example of mythology that can't be confirmed. And classic example of that's the kind of shit that, especially more so when you're younger, that will instill that fear in you. And it's all mythological. It can't be proven. It can't be confirmed. That's some of the ridiculous nonsense that we were told, and there's no truth to that, right? And then you go on to say, I can't believe how bamboozled I have been. So many people are caught up in this fairy tale, and that pretty much explains it in a nutshell. Remember, if I can create a myth, let's just say in this case, this concept here via religion, and I can get the masses to co-sign on it, it starts to become the norm. And as crazy as it might be, those that go against that are considered to be the ones per se that are, crazy. When in essence, when you really look at that statement from this perspective, it kind of speaks for itself. It's crazy. All right. What else we got? Akea was typing, in New Orleans, we celebrate when people die. We parade through the streets with a band, drinking and dancing. Yes, and that's why I was saying earlier, when most people term, you understand, as quote unquote, death is not what we really think. And as Kaya was just typed in, it goes to show you that's because their perception of what it is represents something entirely different. That's the whole point. It's not looked upon the way it is, quote unquote, via religions. So again, the purpose of going over what we just went over is to demystify all that. Okay. All right. What else we got here? Something go wrong with that. Hold on a second. Connected, secure. I just want to make sure I still can. Everybody just do me a favor. I have a problem here. Anybody having any issues with the connection? Just somebody type something in. I just want to make sure there's no issue with the connection because I'm saying something right here. Okay, I see. All right, let me see what's going on. I thought something happened because I saw it on here. All right, thanks, Dan. Let me see if I can fix this. Give me 1 second. I just started to see the signal drop. Don't know why. Hold on 1 second. And I started to see some people drop out of the room. That's crazy because, all right, it says connected, secured. Dan, can you see? Can you see the pitch? Is there still video on, or you just hear it? I'm gonna communicate with you since. All right. Yeah, I don't know what the fuck happened. That's crazy. I've never seen this shit happen before. Brother Dan, can you hear? You can hear me, right? But can you? Is there still video where you can see, or if anybody else is having the issue? That's crazy. Wow. Hold on. Bear with me. See if I can see what's going on here. Hold on 1 second. I ain't never seen this shit happen. All right. Wow. Hold on 1 second. All right. That is crazy. I think we opened up a porthole. Hold on 1 second. All right. I might. That is crazy. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to fix it. I'll get it fixed. All right. Let me see if I disconnect. I might lose some of these, but I might have to reconnect. Just hold on. All right. Hold on.